Welcome back to our vice presidential debate special. I want to bring back in our panel Larry Sabato, Doug Wead, and Jonathan Darman. So, Doug, let's jump right back into it. It's been 40 years since the first VP debate that was televised between Bob Dole and Walter Mondale. I'm going to shock our audience and say I was there for that. I wasn't in the room, but I was around during that debate. And there was a memorable moment from that debate when Dole was asked about his running mate's decision to pardon Richard Nixon. Let's listen to that.
It is an appropriate topic, I guess, but it's not a very good issue any more than the war in Vietnam would be, or World War II, or World War I, or the war in Korea. All Democrat wars, all in this century. I figured up the other day, if we added up the killed and wounded in Democrat wars in this century, it'd be about 1.6 million Americans, enough to fill the city of Detroit. Now, if we want to go back and rake that over and over and over, we can do that. I assume Senator Mondale doesn't want to do that. But it seems to me that the pardon of Richard Nixon is behind us. Watergate's behind us. If we have this vision for America, and if we're really concerned about those people out there and their problems, yes, and their education and their jobs, we ought to be talking about that.
I think Senator Dole has richly earned his reputation as a hatchet man tonight by implying and stating that World War II and the Korean War were democratic wars. Does he really mean to suggest to the American people that there was a partisan difference over our involvement in the war to fight Nazi Germany? I don't think any reasonable American would accept that.
All right. And I know we have three historians here with us, but first I just got to talk about the optics of that debate. This is just a different generation where you see Dole sort of like leaning casually. You can almost imagine that he has a cigarette, like as he's debating, Walter Mondale there. I mean, just the optics of that and the measured tone, even as they attack each other, is something that we don't see anymore, Doug, in debates at any level.
Yeah, the debates now, the practice debates that I were part of were all videotaped, and the candidates were forced to go through the whole process. I have worked with candidates who didn't want to do it, who said, no, I'm not going to stand in a ballroom and listen to somebody on my staff for 20 minutes. I just you need to grill me on these questions. I need to develop my answers. But the ones who won, they do the whole thing. They don't have the sniffling with the microphone you saw with Donald Trump, because they've actually rehearsed it with cameras, with microphones, and they've gone through those boring parts when the other people had to talk to get the actual feel. And that's what we have for true professionals today in these debates. And
Larry, that raises an interesting point. I wonder if in that exchange between Dole and Mondale, that was not a coached response from Senator Dole. That was how he really felt. In other words, today, these candidates, except with the exception of Donald Trump, go through hours and hours and hours of debate practice where their handlers tell them, if somebody says this, you respond this way. But and I could be wrong, but is it in your analysis and your historical background, the fact that probably Dole was just really speaking off the cuff when he blamed the Democrats for all the past wars in the United States?
Well, apparently he had mentioned this beforehand. He had used it on other occasions, and it just hadn't been reported, or it was in private circumstances. Obviously, it was a mistake, and Dole, in retrospect, realized that it was a mistake. Senator Dole had many sterling moments in his long political career, but that was not one of them. And it did help the Democratic ticket. Jimmy Carter took up the cause along with Walter Mondale.
And Jonathan, do you recall if that became something that the media talked about? In other words, now we know that we live in a landscape where if you say one thing, if you make one, I mean, Twitter exploded when Donald Trump was sniffling into that microphone. If that's something, that Dole comment is something that the media reported.
I mean, you didn't have people tweeting out Bob Dole's body language.
Yes, young people, Twitter did not exist in 1976.
So keep in mind, I mean, this was such a new phenomenon. Even in 1976, there were the 1960 debates, and then there was a 16-year pause. So when 1976 comes around again and they reintroduce these debates, everyone understood this was a big deal. By then it was a big part of the lore, how much of an effect it had on the 1960 race. But there wasn't all the additional lore about preparation and about the sort of moments that can get you. So Dole, I think, later on said he really didn't prepare that much for the debate, and he certainly didn't think about how lines that he might have been using out on the stump would actually have an impact on a national audience and how sort of poorly that would play in the country in 1976.
It's really fascinating.